Engaged research team, networking by a community health center engaged research group intersectional. The title is Shifting Power to Our Community Partners, Voices from the Front Line. Sorry, I got mixed up there. This will be led by Drs. Tracy Battaglia and Dr. Charlie Williams. They will be leading us in this section. Dr. Battaglia is an associate professor of medicine and epidemiology at the School of Public Health in our School of Medicine. She is an associate director for clinical sciences at the BU Cancer Center. She's a director of Center of Excellence for Women's Health. She's part of the Evans Center for Interdisciplinary Biomedical Research. She's also the associate director of the Belkin Breast Cancer Center, and is one of the core, is the leader for the community engagement core for our CTSI. And then lastly, she's the director of the BU Women's Health Interdisciplinary Research Center. She's a colleague of mine in the section of general internal medicine, and she is an expert in this area of breast cancer in underserved communities, especially African-American women. In addition to Dr. Battaglia, Dr. Charlie Williams will also be hosting this section. He is an assistant professor of family medicine in the Department of Family Medicine. He's the vice chair for network development for the Department of Family Medicine at BU. He's the medical director of the Boston Health Net, which is a network of 14 community health centers affiliated with BMC ever since the medical school and ever since the two hospitals merged back in 1995. I will mention it. Well, that's it. Take it away, Tracy and Charlie.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Can I just ask for clarification, Chris, on our timeline, given that we're a little bit behind? Do you want me to try to wrap it up under an hour, or do we still have the full hour?
If you could possibly shave 5 minutes, since we're running a little behind, but if you can't, that's okay. We'll do the best we can.
We can do our best.
Okay.
So thank you so much for that introduction. I just want to share my real excitement for the session today. And I want to start with some acknowledgements and thanks. First of all, to my community engagement team members, some of which are represented on this panel today, but without which none of this work could be done. This is definitely teamwork. And so I'm just privileged to have the opportunity to facilitate the discussion and highlight some of the work that we're doing. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Shanahan, Bear Merit and Center for giving us a full hour on the agenda. It is coveted time and space, and I think it just highlights and acknowledges the importance of community engagement and achieving health equity through our translational science program. I want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Chang for her excellent presentation and her real the work that she's done that has really been that has highlighted the inequity in healthcare for in the era of COVID, and her comments that really set us up nicely about how much more work there is to be done. And that's what this panel discussion is really all about. And then finally, to Dr. Walke, who just talked with us about the learning health systems and really highlighted the importance of team science, which is also reflected in the panel that's before you. So thank you to my panelists who have put their screens on. I'm going to hold off on introducing them. I'm going to ask Jennifer to please share the slides so I can go through with you our planned agenda. I promise this is meant to be an interactive discussion. And so we're going to try to keep our comments brief so that we can really use the majority of the time to engage in a dialogue with our panelists and with all of you. So the title of our talk is Shifting Power to Our Community Partners, Voices from the Front Lines. And Jen, you can go ahead and advance the slides. The goals of our discussion today are to really sort of set some foundation for our discussion around understanding translational science barriers that are amenable to community engaged approaches. So you have a sense of how our community engagement program really approaches our work. And then we're going to spend the majority of time hearing from our community partners around two initiatives that were really motivated by the pandemic, that really are attempting to shift the power to our community partners. Next slide. So I think we have an obligation as a CTSI to sort of just step back a minute and reflect on why do we have a Clinical Translational Science Institute. For those of us who are translational scientists, we understand that there are incredible barriers to translational science. I am not going to list them all for you here, but acknowledge that those highlighted in red are barriers that are specifically focused on our inability to achieve health equity and are therefore amenable to community engaged approaches. The fact that we have individualized incentive structures, homogeneity in our research teams and leadership, and the absence of community voices at every stage of our research continuum. And then our institutional processes that really impede our ability to move forward. Next slide. So our community engagement program thinks a lot about our approach and our strategy. And for those organizational scientists, you may be familiar with this, this phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so if you click the next forward, Jen, our community engagement approaches will not be successful unless we have a culture shift. And that's really what we're talking about today. Next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think we have to acknowledge the root causes of why we have to have a culture shift. There are dominant ideological narratives that result in our society having a dominant class, which is rewarded through individualism, competition, and self-interest. And so these figures sort of try to highlight that. The first is sort of the ivory tower of the academic system, where all the knowledge is sort of held in one place, and others are on the outskirts. Money drives a lot of what we do in our society, and there's not equal distribution of that money. And then our health systems and all of our systems they're not necessarily broken, they were built this way. And so that's where that's how we've gotten to where we are. But if we want to get to where we're going, we need to share power, celebrate differences, center relationships, and reward collaboration. And that's exactly what community engaged research really attempts to do. Next slide. So as we heard about the learning health system, there are competencies, and they include community engagement competencies. And our program thinks a lot about how to help build these competencies in our translational research programs. I'm not going to list them for you there, but they're highlighted by those values that I just highlighted. And so next slide, Jen. The real challenge for us as an organization, as a CTSI, is not what can we do, but rather, are we willing to do it? And that's what we're going to talk about with our panelists today. Next slide. This is the spectrum of community engagement that, I think really highlights that just like our efforts to be an anti-racist, it's a continuum and it's a constant effort that we have to continue to sort of think about. And we want to get from the left all the way to the right. We don't want to just inform our communities, consult with them, and involve them here and there. We really want to collaborate with them and empower them, that if this is issues that they care about, we want them to lead initiatives and figure out how we, as a Translational Science Institute, can support them. Next slide. So my colleague, Linda Sprague-Martinez, who's on the call today, introduced me to the Trojan mouse. And I love this because it's really about not winning the war, but really sort of winning the battles, the small battles. And in order to shift culture, we need to take it one step at a time. We have to rethink our funding structures, where we allocate our resources. We have to be deliberate in our programming, hiring, and policies. We have to revisit procedures and systems, and we have to attend organizational design and structures for us to get to where we want to go.